Thomas Meehan's story begins quietly, long before the thunder of war ever reached his ears. He was born on a warm summer day, July 8, 1921, in Philadelphia, a city alive with history but for him, still full of possibilities yet to be discovered. As a boy growing up in Germantown, he showed a sensitivity that set him apart. He was thoughtful, observant, and gifted with words. Writing came naturally to him, but it wasn't his only passion. He could see the world not just as it was, but as it might be, lines, shapes, and shadows forming under his pencil. Art called to him, and he answered. That calling led him to the Pennsylvania Museum and School of Industrial Art, where he began shaping a future that had nothing to do with war. In those classrooms, surrounded by charcoal sketches and unfinished canvases, Thomas was building a life rooted in creativity and expression. It was the kind of life that felt certain, almost inevitable, but history has a way of interrupting even the most carefully imagined futures. As the world edged closer to war, that quiet path began to disappear. When the Second World War erupted, it didn't just shake nations. It reached into the lives of young men like Thomas and redirected them entirely. On March 16, 1941, he made a choice that countless others would make. He volunteered. The artist became a soldier. At first, Thomas served in the armored cavalry. He was capable, more than capable in fact. He was a strong rider, a skilled climber, and someone who adapted quickly to the demands placed upon him. But something about it didn't quite fit. There was a restlessness in him, a sense that he belonged somewhere else. When news spread of a new kind of unit, the parachute infantry, it captured his attention immediately. It was dangerous, untested, and unlike anything the Army had seen before. He didn't hesitate. Thomas Meehan joined the airborne. By the time he arrived in Baker Company of the 1st Battalion, 506th Parachute Infantry Regiment of the 101st Airborne Division, he had stepped fully into a different life. No longer just an artist, he was now a leader of men. As a platoon leader, he carried responsibility, but also something less tangible, a quiet steadiness that others seemed to notice. In February of 1944, while stationed in England, that responsibility deepened. He was given command of Easy Company. It was not an easy position to inherit. The company had already been shaped by strong personalities and harsh training. Thomas stepped into the role without fanfare, replacing Captain Herbert Sobel, a man who had left behind a complicated legacy. Yet for all the significance of the moment, very little was ever recorded about Meehan's time in command. He remains, in many ways, a shadow in the story. Even Richard Winters, who would later become synonymous with Easy Company's legacy, rarely spoke of him. Their relationship seems to have been distant, perhaps professional but not personal. And yet, glimpses of Meehan's character appear in small moments, remembered by the men who served under him. Don Malarkey once recalled returning to the company after being hospitalized, only to be threatened with punishment for being absent. It could have ended badly for him, but Meehan intervened. From the next room, having overheard the exchange, he stepped in and firmly reprimanded the accusation. It was a small act, but it revealed something essential about him. He was fair, and he listened. Others noticed something else entirely. Carwood Lipton later described him as a gentle man, kind and decent. But there was uncertainty too. War demanded a certain hardness, and some wondered whether Meehan possessed it. Could someone so measured and thoughtful lead men through the chaos of battle? That question would never be fully answered. On the evening of June 5, 1944, the world held its breath. The invasion of Normandy was hours away. Across England, thousands of paratroopers prepared to board aircraft that would carry them into history. Among them was Lieutenant Thomas Meehan, along with 16 members of Easy Company's headquarters section. They climbed aboard a C-47 transport plane, just one among many in the vast airborne armada lifting into the night. Their destination was Drop Zone C, near the small French village of Saint-Marie-du-Mont. The sky over Normandy, however, was anything but welcoming. As the planes approached the French coast, German anti-aircraft fire erupted below them. Black bursts of flak filled the sky, tearing through the formations. One of those shells found Meehan's aircraft. An eyewitness in another plane watched helplessly. The C-47 drifted out of formation, beginning a slow, uncertain turn. For a moment it seemed like the pilot might regain control. Landing lights flickered on, a hopeful sign. Then, in an instant, everything was lost. The plane struck the hedgerows below and exploded. It crashed near Beauceville Plains, not far from Saint-Mère-Église. There were no survivors. Every man aboard, crew and paratroopers alike, was killed. With them, Easy Company lost its commanding officer and its entire headquarters section in a single devastating moment. But the tragedy did not end there. For years, there was no confirmation of what had happened. The wreckage remained undiscovered, hidden among the hedgerows. Meehan and the others were listed simply as missing in action. Back in England, Easy Company moved forward without answers, now under the command of Richard Winters, waiting for news that never came. The crash site itself smoldered for days after the explosion. When it was eventually examined, small haunting details emerged from the wreckage. Among them was Meehan's watch, its hands frozen at 1:12, the exact moment time had stopped for him. It wasn't until the early 1950s that the truth was fully uncovered. The remains were identified, and those who had been lost were finally accounted for. Meehan and many of the others were brought home to the United States, laid to rest at Jefferson Barracks National Cemetery in Missouri. Decades later, witnesses would come forward, adding fragments to the story. A pilot flying behind Meehan's plane recalled seeing it take multiple hits, flak tearing through the fuselage. A French mayor described watching the aircraft struggle, trying to land before disappearing from sight, followed by the sound of a distant explosion. The fire burned so intensely that no one could approach the site for days. Years after that, investigators returned. They sifted through the ashes and debris, uncovering parachute hooks still locked in place. None of the men had managed to jump. Personal items, dog tags, rings, small keepsakes, were recovered, silent reminders of lives cut short. A memorial now stands where the plane fell, and yet, perhaps the most powerful remnants of Thomas Meehan's life were not found in the wreckage at all, but in his words, his letters. His wife Anne had cherished every one of them. She shared them with a close friend, who painstakingly copied them by hand. That simple act preserved something that would otherwise have been lost forever, when the originals were destroyed in a flood years later. In one letter, written just weeks before D-Day, Meehan reflected on the war and the fragile nature of peace. He questioned whether humanity could ever truly escape conflict, whether peace was something lasting or only temporary, a pause between storms. His thoughts were not those of a hardened soldier, but of a man still deeply connected to the world he had left behind. He wrote about America, about its strength, its contradictions, and the responsibility it carried. He spoke of a future where strength and kindness would have to coexist, where the next generation might be spared what his had endured. Then, on June 5, 1944, just hours before takeoff, he wrote one final letter. There was no philosophy in it, no reflection on the world, only love. He told Anne that he was about to lead the finest group of men into France. He told her he wasn't afraid, not really. But more than anything, he told her how much he longed to hold her again. He signed it simply, "Forever your Tom." That was the last piece of him she would ever receive. In the years that followed, his daughter would reach out to those who had served alongside him, searching for some connection to the father she never truly knew. But there were few answers to give. Meehan had passed through their lives too briefly, leaving only faint impressions behind, and so his story remains unfinished in a way. A man who might have been many things, an artist, a writer, a leader, remembered instead for a moment in the night sky over Normandy.